Have you ever wondered what sparked the British interest in Kenya, a land thousands of miles away from their own? Our story begins in the late 19th century. As the sun rose over the vast savannas and towering mountains of East Africa, the British Empire was setting its sights on a new horizon. Kenya, with its diverse landscapes and wealth of resources, had caught the eye of the ambitious empire. Eager to extend its reach, the motives driving British colonization were manifold. At its core, Kenya was seen as a strategic jewel, a crucial link in the chain of Britain's imperial interests. The British Empire, at the height of its power, had a global vision, and Kenya was to become a vital piece in this grand game of geopolitical chess. To the British, Kenya represented a gateway to the lucrative trade routes of East Africa and the Indian Ocean. The potential for agricultural exploitation, particularly coffee and tea, was also a significant draw. Its strategic location along the proposed Cape to Cairo railway route further heightened its appeal. In essence, colonizing Kenya was more than a mere territorial conquest. It was a strategic move designed to bolster Britain's global standing. The year 1895 marked a turning point in the history of Kenya. The British established the East Africa Protectorate, laying the foundation for official colonial rule. It was a moment of profound change. A moment when the destinies of two distant lands became inextricably intertwined. Over the next several decades, the British would impose their rule, their systems, and their culture on Kenya, forever altering the course of its history. Thus, the seeds of British colonial rule were sown in the fertile lands of Kenya, far away from the British Isles. As the sun set on that pivotal year, the dawn of a new era was just beginning, an era that would shape Kenya and its people in ways they could never have imagined. So, the British had established their rule. But how did this impact the Kenyan people and their land? With the dawn of the British rule, the landscape of Kenya began to undergo dramatic changes. One of the most significant shifts was the introduction of cash crops. The fertile Kenyan lands were soon dominated by foreign crops such as tea, coffee, and sisal. This led to the transformation of Kenya into a primary products exporter, but at the cost of local food production. The Kenyan people, once self-sufficient, were thrust into a global economic system they had not chosen. Land alienation was another major consequence of British rule. The best and most fertile lands were taken over by the British, pushing the locals into less fertile areas. This not only disrupted the agricultural practices of the Kenyan people, but also led to a sense of displacement and loss of identity. The British also implemented a new administrative system which fundamentally altered the political dynamics in Kenya. Traditional chiefs were replaced with British administrators, and a foreign legal system was imposed. This tore apart the fabric of Kenyan society, as the local people had to navigate an unfamiliar and often oppressive system. Furthermore, the British rule imposed forced labor upon the Kenyan people. Men and women were compelled to work on the plantations and in the construction of railways, often under harsh conditions. This not only led to a loss of freedom, but also resulted in widespread suffering and hardship. These changes brought about by the British rule had profound effects on the Kenyan people. They led to social disruptions as traditional ways of life were upended. Economically, the focus on cash crops and forced labor created a system of exploitation. Politically, the imposition of a foreign administrative system led to a loss of autonomy and a sense of disempowerment among the locals. The British rule, while bringing certain modernizations, also led to significant disruptions in the Kenyan way of life. The impact of this rule is still felt today and continues to shape the socio-economic and political landscape of Kenya. But the Kenyans were not merely passive recipients of British rule. How did they respond, you may wonder? Well, resistance was a constant undercurrent throughout the British colonial period in Kenya. This resistance took on many forms, both overt and covert, each as potent as the other in its own way. The most visible form of resistance were the armed rebellions, where groups of Kenyans rose up against the British, often at great personal risk. These rebellions were typically sparked by land seizures, forced labor, or other oppressive tactics employed by the colonial government. However, they were more than just reactions to specific grievances. They were expressions of a broader, deep-seated resentment against colonial rule and a burning desire for self-determination. One such rebellion that stands out is the Mau Mau Uprising, a defining moment in Kenya's struggle against British rule. This was a guerrilla war waged by the Kikuyu ethnic group, starting in the early 1950s. Though ultimately unsuccessful in military terms, the Mau Mau Uprising was significant. It exposed the brutality of British rule, ignited a wave of nationalism, and intensified demands for independence. Yet, it's equally important to recognize the less visible, everyday forms of resistance. These were the subtle acts of defiance, such as slow work, non-compliance or sabotage, that chipped away at the authority of the British. While these forms of resistance may not have made headlines, they were a constant, pervasive reminder of the Kenyans' refusal to accept colonial rule. Even in the face of suppression and hardship, the Kenyan spirit was not quelled. Instead, it was stoked into a flame that would eventually engulf the entire nation. The struggles, the sacrifices, and the relentless pursuit of freedom were all steps on the arduous journey towards independence. Thus, resistance was not merely a reaction to British rule. It was an assertion of Kenyan identity, a refusal to be silenced, and a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Kenyan people. From the ashes of suppression, the spirit of independence was beginning to rise. So how did the struggle for independence unfold in the shadow of these resistances? In the mid-20th century, the call for self-rule in Kenya was becoming increasingly loud and clear. This was a period marked by a profound shift, a transition from the oppressive colonial rule to an era of self-determination. A key figure in this struggle was Jomo Kenyatta. A man of immense charisma and political acumen, Kenyatta emerged as the face of the Kenyan independence movement. He was instrumental in uniting diverse ethnic groups under the banner of nationalism, fostering a sense of Kenyan identity that superseded tribal affiliations. In the late 50s, Kenyatta and others formed the Kenya African National Union, or KANU, a political party that advocated for independence. Despite being imprisoned by the British for his alleged role in the Mau Mau Rebellion, Kenyatta's influence continued to grow, and he became a symbol of the struggle for freedom. But independence didn't come easily. It was a product of years of negotiation, most notably at the Lancaster House Conferences in London. The first of these conferences took place in early 1960, with the representatives from both the British government and the Kenyan political factions. The negotiations were fraught with tension as the delegates grappled with issues like land ownership and political representation. The British were reluctant to relinquish control, while the Kenyans were insistent on their right to self-governance. Yet, despite these challenges, progress was made. Over the course of several more conferences, the terms of Kenyan independence were slowly hammered out. The final agreement laid the groundwork for a democratic Kenya with a constitution, a parliament, and a commitment to universal suffrage. And so, after years of struggle and negotiation, the moment of liberation finally arrived. On December 12, 1963, Kenya finally emerged from the shadows of colonial rule. This marked not only the end of British control, but also the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Kenya, a chapter defined by self-rule, national unity, and the relentless pursuit of progress. On December 12, 1963, Kenya finally emerged from the shadows of colonial rule. So, Kenya was free, but what was the legacy of British rule? The long-term impacts of British rule in Kenya are as vast as they are diverse. From socio-economic inequalities to political structures and cultural changes, the remnants of this colonial past are intricately woven into the fabric of modern Kenya. Let's start with the socio-economic inequalities. The British introduced the cash crop economy to Kenya, which saw the African population displaced from their fertile lands to make way for lucrative crops like coffee and tea. These policies sowed the seeds of economic disparity that continues to linger today. A small elite now controls a large portion of the nation's wealth, while a significant percentage of the population grapples with poverty. On the political front, the British rule laid the foundation for the centralized system of governance in Kenya. The British administrators established a strong central government, sidelining traditional African political structures. Post-independence, Kenya has retained this centralized system, leading to conflicts and power struggles that have often resulted in political instability. Culturally, British rule brought about significant changes. English became the official language and Western education was introduced. These changes have had a profound impact on Kenyan society, leading to a shift in cultural values and creating a new urban elite. But it's not just about the impacts. It's about how Kenya has grappled with this legacy in the post-independence era. The nation has embarked on a journey to address these socio-economic inequalities, reform its political structures, and embrace its cultural heritage. It's a journey filled with challenges, but also opportunities for growth and transformation. In conclusion, the legacy of British rule in Kenya is not one that can be easily erased or forgotten. It is a complex tapestry of influences and impacts that continue to shape the nation. The echoes of British rule continue to resonate in Kenya, shaping its present and future in profound ways.